Chapter 42. Of that greater family, one member had been in the house all through the month which had just gone by. But he had been so quiet, so carefully unobtrusive, that he had been scarcely noticed. Very early each morning, day after day, John had gone outside for his breakfast, and thence to the office where he himself had handled the business as well as he could, only coming to Roger at night now and then with some matter he could not settle alone, but always stoutly declaring that he needed no other assistance. "Don't come, Mr. Gale," he had urged. "You look worn out. You'll be sick yourself if you ain't careful, and anyhow, if you hang around, you'll be here whenever she wants you." Early in Deborah's illness, John had offered to give up his room for the use of one of the nurses. "That's mighty thoughtful of you, Johnny," Allen had responded, "but we've got plenty of room as it is. Just you stick around. We want you here." "All right, Doc. If there's any little thing, answering the phone at night or anything else I can do." "Thank you, so. I'll let you know, but in the meantime, go to bed." From that day on, John had taken not only his breakfast but his supper, too, outside, and no one had noticed his absence. Coming in late, he had hobbled silently up to his room, stopping to listen at Deborah's door. He had kept so completely out of the way, it was not till the baby was 3 weeks old and past its second crisis that Deborah thought to ask for John. When he came to her bed, she smiled up at him with the baby in her arms. "I thought we'd see him together," she said. John stood on his crutches staring down, and as Deborah watched him, all at once her look grew intent. "Johnny," she said softly, "go over there, will you, and turn up the light so we can see him better." And when this was done, though she still talked smilingly of the child, again and again she glanced up at John's face, at the strange, self-absorbed expression, stern and sad and wistful there. When he had gone, the tears came in her eyes, and Deborah sent for her husband. The next day at the office, John came into Roger's room. Roger had been at work several days, and they had already cleared up their affairs. "Here's something," said John gruffly, "that I wish you'd put away somewhere." And he handed to his partner a small blue leather album filled with the newspaper clippings dealing with Deborah's illness. On the front page was one with her picture and a long record of her service to the children of New York. "She wouldn't want to see it now," John continued awkwardly, "but I thought maybe later on the boy would like to have it. What do you think?" he inquired. Roger gave him a kindly glance. "I think he will. It's a fine thing to keep," and he handed it back. "But I guess you'd better put it away and give it to her later yourself." John shifted his weight on his crutches so quickly that Roger looked up in alarm. "Look here, you're not well." He saw now that the face of the cripple was white, and the sweat was glistening on his brow. John gave a harsh little nervous laugh. "Oh, it's nothing much, partner," he replied. "That's another thing I wanted to tell you. I've had some queer pains lately, new ones." He caught his breath. "Why didn't you tell me, you young fool? You had your own troubles, didn't you?" John spoke with difficulty. "But I'll be all right, I guess. All I need is a few days off." Roger had pressed a button, and his stenographer came in. "Call a taxi," he said sharply. "And John, you go right over there and lie down. I'm going to take you home at once." "I've got a better scheme," said John, setting his determined jaws. The sweat was pouring down his cheeks. "It may be a week, but there's just a chance it may be a little worse than that. So I've got a room in a hospital, see? Be better all round." He swayed forward. "Johnny!" Roger caught him just in time, and the boy lay senseless in his arms. At home, a few hours later, Allen came with another physician down from John's small bedroom. He saw his colleague to the door and then came in to Roger. "I'm afraid Johnny has come to the end." For a moment Roger stared at him. "He has, huh?" he answered huskily. "You're absolutely sure he has? There's nothing on earth we can do?" "Nothing more than we're doing now." "He has fooled you fellows before, you know." Not this time. How long will it be? Days or hours? I don't know. He mustn't suffer. I'll see to that. Roger rose and walked the floor. It was the last month did it, of course. Yes, I blame myself for that. I wouldn't, said Alan gently. You've done a good deal for Johnny Gear. He's done a good deal for this family. Can Deborah see him? I wish she could. Better stretch a point for her, hadn't you? She's been a kind of mother to John. I know, but she can't leave her bed. Then you won't tell her? I think she knows. She talked to me about him last night. That's it, a mother, Roger cried. She was watching. We were blind. He came back to his chair and dropped into it. Does John know this himself? He asked. He suspects it, I think, said Alan. Then go and tell him, will you, that he's going to get well, and after you've done it, I'll see him myself. I've got something in mind I want to think out. After Alan had left the room, Roger sat thinking about John. He thought of John's birth and his drunken mother, the accident and his struggle for life, through babyhood and childhood, through ignorance and filth and pain, through din and clamor and hunger, fear, of the long, fierce fight which John had made not to be put away in some big institution, of his battle to keep up his head, to be somebody, make a career for himself. He thought of John's becoming one of Deborah's big family, only one of thousands, but it seemed now to Roger that John had stood out from them all, as the figure best embodying that great, fierce hunger for a full life, and as the link connecting the one who slowly, year by year, had emerged from her greater family and come into her small one. And last of all, he thought of John as his own companion, his only one, in the immense adventure on which he was so soon to embark. A few moments later, he stood by John's bed. Pretty hard, Johnny? He gently asked. Oh, not so bad as it might be, I guess. You'll soon feel better, they tell me, boy. John shut his eyes. Yes, he muttered. Can you stand my talking just a minute? Sure I can, John whispered. I'm not suffering any now. He's given me something to put me to sleep. What is it you want to talk about? Business? Not exactly, partner. It's about the family. You've got so you're almost one of us. I guess you know us pretty well. I guess I do. It's meant a lot to me, Mr. Gale. But I'll tell you what you don't know, John, Roger went on slowly. I had a son in the family once, and he died when he was 3 months old. That was a long time ago, and I never had another, you see, to take his place till you came along. There fell a breathless silence. And I've been thinking lately, Roger added steadily. I haven't long to live, you know, and I've been wondering whether you'd like to come into the family. Take my name. Do you understand? John said nothing. His eyes were still closed, but presently, groping over the bed, he found Roger's hand and clutched it tight. After this, from time to time, his throat contracted sharply. Tears welled from under his eyelids. Then gradually, as the merciful drug which Alan had given did its work, his clutch relaxed and he began breathing deep and hard. But still, for some time longer, Roger sat quietly by his side. The next night he was there again. Death had come to the huddled form on the bed, but there had been no relaxing. With the head thrown rigidly far back and all the features tense and hard, it was a fighting figure still, a figure of stern protest against the world's injustice. But Roger was not thinking of this, but of the discovery he had made, that in their talk of the night before, John had understood him completely. For upon a piece of paper which Alan had given the lad that day, these words had been painfully inscribed. This is my last will and testament. I am in my right mind. I know what I am doing, though nobody else does. Nobody is here. To my partner Roger Gale I leave my share in our business, and to my teacher Deborah Baird I leave my crutches for her school. Chapter 43. After John had gone away, the house was very quiet. Only from the room upstairs there could be heard occasionally the faint, clear cry of Deborah's child. And once again to Roger came a season of repose. He was far from unhappy. His disease, though progressing fast, gave him barely any pain. It rather made its presence felt by the manner in which it affected his mind. His inner life grew uneven. At times his thoughts were as in a fog. Again they were amazingly clear, and vistas opened far ahead. He could not control his thinking. This bothered him at the office, in the work he still had to do. For some months he had been considering an offer from one of his rivals, a modern concern which wished to buy out his business together with that of 3 other firms and consolidate them all into one corporation. And Roger was selling, and it was hard, for the whole idea of bargaining was more distasteful than ever now. He had to keep reminding himself of Edith and her children. At last it was over. His books were closed, and there was nothing left to be done, nor did he care to linger. These rooms had meant but little to him. They had been but a place of transition from the old office far downtown, so full of memories of his youth, to the big corporation looming ahead, the huge, impersonal clipping mill into which his business was to merge. And it came to his mind that New York was like that. No settled, calm, abiding place cherishing its memories, but only a town of transition, a great turbulent city of change, restlessly shaking off its past, tearing down and building anew, building higher, 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 rearing to the very stars and shouting, "Can you see me now?" What was the goal of this mad career? What dazzling city would be here? For a time he stared out of his window as into a promised land. Slowly at last he rose from his desk. Clippings, clippings, clippings. He looked at those long rows of girls, gleaning in items large and small the public reputations of all kinds of men and women. New kinds in a new nation seething with activities, sweeping on like some wide river swollen at flood season to a new America, a world which Roger would not know. And yet it would be his world still, for in it he would play a part. In their lives, too, we shall be there, the dim, strong figures of the past. From his desk he gathered a few belongings. Then he looked into John's small room, with the big gold motto over the desk, "This is no place for your troubles or mine." On the desk lay that small album, John's parting gift to Deborah's boy. Roger picked it up and walked out of the office. He had never liked goodbyes. In the elevator he noticed that his shoes needed shining, and when he reached the street below he stopped at the stand on the corner. The stocky Greek with bushy black hair, who had run the stand for many years, gave him a cheery greeting. For Roger had stopped there frequently. Not that he cared about his shoes, but he always liked to watch the crowds of people passing. "No hurry, boss?" "None," said Roger. "Then I give a fine shine. Polish too?" "Yes, polish too." And Roger settled back to watch. "And put in new shoestrings," he added with a whimsical smile. Men and women, girls and boys by thousands passed him, pushing, hurrying, shuffling by. Girls tittering and nudging and darting quick side glances, bobbing heads and figures, vigorous steps and dancing eyes, life bubbling over everywhere, in laughter, in sharp angry tones, in glad expectant chatter. Deborah's big family. Across the street was a movie between 2 lurid posters, and there was a dance hall overhead. The windows were all open, and faintly, above the roar of the street, he could hear the piano, drum, fiddle, and horn. The thoroughfare each moment grew more tumultuous to his ears, with trolley cars and taxis, motor buses, trucks and drays. A small red motor dashed uptown with piles of evening papers. A great black motor hearse rushed by. In a taxi which had stopped in a jam, a man was kissing a girl in his arms, and both of them were laughing. The smart little toque of blue satin she wore was crushed to one side. How red were her lips as she threw back her head. "Silk or cotton, boss, which you like?" Roger glanced at the shoestrings and pondered. "Silk," he grunted in reply. Idly for a moment he watched this busy little man. From whence had he come in far-away Greece? What existence had he here, and what kind of life would he still have through those many years to come? A feeling half of sadness crept into Roger's heavy eyes as he looked at the man, at his smiling face, and then at other faces in the multitudes sweeping past. The moment he tried to single them out, how doubly chaotic it became. What an ocean of warm desires, passions, vivid hopes and worries. Vaguely he could feel them pass. Often, in the midst of his life, his active and self-centered life, Roger had looked at these crowds on the street and had thought these faces commonplace. But now at the end, it was not so. A woman with a baby carriage stopped directly in front of him and stood there anxiously watching for a chance to cross the street, and Roger thought of Deborah. Heavily he climbed down from his seat, paid the man and bade him good night, and went home to see Deborah's baby. For a long time he sat by the cradle. Presently Deborah joined him, and soon they were laughing heartily at the astonishing jerks and kicks and grimaces of the tiny boy. He was having his bath, and he hated it. But, safe at last on his mother's lap, wrapped to his ears in a big soft towel, he grew very gay and contented, and looked waggishly about. There followed long, lazy days of spring, as April drifted into May. Early in the morning Roger could hear through his window the cries of the vendors of flowers and fruits, and he listened drowsily. He rose late and spent most of the day in the house, but occasionally went out for a stroll. And one balmy evening, when groups of youths came trooping by, singing in close harmony, Roger called a taxi and went far down through the tenement streets to a favorite haunt of his, a little Syrian pawn shop, where after long delving he purchased a ring to put in the new collection that he had been making lately. He had nearly a dozen now. Days passed. The house was still so quiet. Deborah was still upstairs. At last, one night upon leaving his study, he stopped uncertainly in the hall. He took more time than was his wont in closing up the house for the night, in trying all the windows, in turning out the various lights. Room after room he left in the dark. Then he went slowly up the stairs, his hand gratefully feeling those guiding points grown so familiar to his touch through many thousand evenings. His hand lingered on the banister, and he stopped again to listen there. He did not come downstairs again. He was able to sleep but little at night. Turning restlessly on his bed, he would glance out of the windows up at the beetling wall close by, tier on tier of apartments from which faint voices dropped out of the dark. Gradually, as the night wore on, these voices would all die away into long mysterious silences, for to him at least such silences had grown to be very mysterious. Alone in the hours that followed, even these modern neighbors and this strange, new, eager town pressing down upon his house seemed no longer strange to him, nor so appallingly immense, seemed even familiar and small to him, as the eyes of his mind looked out ahead. From his bed he could see on the opposite wall the picture Judith had given him, always so fresh and cool and dim, with its deep restful tones of blue, of the herdsman and the cattle on the dark mountain rim at dawn. And vaguely he wondered whether it was because he saw more clearly, or whether his mind, in this curious haze, could no longer see so well, that as he looked before him he felt no fear, nor any more uncertainty. All his doubts had lifted. He was so sure of Judith now. As though she were coming to meet him, her image grew more vivid, with memories emerging out of all the years gone by. What memories, what vivid scenes, what intimate conversations they had, her voice so natural, close in his ear, as together they planned for their children. Wistfully, he would search the years for what he should soon tell his wife, until the drowsiness returned, and then again came visions. But by day it was not so, for the life of the house would rouse him and at intervals hold his attention. One evening a slight rustle, a faint fragrance in the room, made Roger suddenly open his eyes, and he saw Laura by his bed, her slender figure clad in blue silk, something white at her full bosom. He noticed her shapely shoulders, her glossy hair, and moist red lips. She was smiling down at him. "See what I've brought you, dear," she said, and she turned to a chair where, one on the other, tray after tray, was piled his whole collection of rings. At sight of them his eyes grew fixed. He could feel his pulse beat faster. "How did you ever find them?" he asked his daughter huskily. "Oh, I had a long hunt all by myself, but I found them at last, and I've brought them home. Shall we look over them a little while?" "Yes," he said. She turned up the light and came and sat down at the bedside with a tray of rings on her lap. One by one she held them up to his gaze, still smiling and talking softly on in that rich, melodious voice of hers, of which he heard but snatches. How good it felt to be so gay! No solemn thoughts nor questionings, just these dusky, glittering beauties here, deep, soft gleams of color, each with its suggestion of memories for Roger, a procession of adventures reaching back into his life. He smiled and lay in silence watching, until at last she bent over him, kissed him softly, breathed a good night, and went out of the room. Roger followed her with his glance. He knew he would never see her again. How graceful of her to go like that. He lay there thinking about her. In her large blue limousine he saw his gay young daughter speeding up the avenue, the purple gleaming pavement reflecting studded lines of lights, and he thought he could see her smiling still. He recalled scattered fragments of her life, the first luxurious little menage, and the second. How many more would there be? She was only in her 20s still. Uneasily he tried to see into the years ahead for her, and he thought he saw a lonely old age, childless, loveless, cynical, hard. But this fear soon fell from his mind. No, whatever happened, she would do it gracefully, an artist always to the end. He sighed and gave up the effort, for he could not think of Laura as old, nor could he think of her any more as being a part of his family. Edith came to him several times, and there was something in her face which gave him sharp forebodings. Making a great effort, he tried to talk to her clearly. "It's hard to keep up with your children," he said. "It means keeping up with everything new. And you stay in your rut, and then it's too late. Before you know it, you're old." But his words subsided in mutterings, and Roger wearily closed his eyes. For a glance up into Edith's face had shown him only pity there, and no heed to his warning. He saw that she looked upon him as old, and still upon herself as young, though he noticed the threads of gray in her hair. Then he realized she was gone, and that his chamber had grown dark. He must have been dreaming. Of what? He asked. He tried to remember, and suddenly out of the darkness, so harsh and clear it startled him, a picture rose in Roger's mind of a stark, lonely figure, a woman in a graveyard cutting the grass on family graves. Where had he seen it? He could not recall. What had it to do with Edith? Was she not living in New York? What had so startled him just now? Some thought, some vivid picture, some nightmare he could not recall. His last talks were with Deborah. All through those days, and the long nights too, he kept fancying she was in the room, and it brought deep balm to his restless soul. He asked her to tell him about the schools, and Deborah talked to him quietly. She was going back to her work in the fall. She felt very humble about it. She told him she felt older now, and she saw that her work was barely begun. But she was even happier than before. Her hand lay in his, and it tightened there. He opened his eyes and looked up into hers. All so strange, he muttered. Life. There was a sharp contracting of her wide and sensitive mouth. Yes, dear, strange, she whispered. But I'm so glad you're going on. He frowned, and he tried to be simple and clear, and make her feel he understood what she had set herself to do. All people, he said slowly, never counted so much as now, and never so hungry, all as now, for all of life, like children, children who should go to school. Your work will grow. I can see ahead. Never a time when every man and woman and child could grow so much, and hand it on, and hand it on, as you will do to your small son. He felt her hand on his forehead, and for some moments nothing was said. Vaguely in glimpses, Roger saw his small grandson growing up, and he pictured other children here, not her own, but of her greater family, as the two merged into one. He felt that she would not grow old. Children, lives of children, work, dreams, and aspirations. How bright it seemed as he stared ahead. Then he heard the cry of her baby. Shall I nurse him here? He heard her ask. He pressed her hand in answer, and when again he opened his eyes, she was by his side with the child at her breast. Its large round eyes, so pure and clear, gazed into his own for a long, long time. Now he's so sleepy, she whispered. Would you like him beside you a moment? Please. He felt the faint scent of the tiny boy, and still those eyes looked into his. He forgot his daughter standing there, and as he watched, a sweet, fresh sense of the mystery of this life so new stole deep into his spirit. All at once the baby fell asleep. Good night, little brother, he whispered. God grant the world be very kind. He could feel the mother lifted up, and he heard the door close softly. Smiling, he too fell asleep, and after that there were only dreams. Chapter 44. And his dreams were of children. Their faces passed before him. Now they were young again in this house. They were eating their suppers, 3 small girls, chattering like magpies. From the end of the table their mother smiled quietly across at him. Come, children, she was saying, that will do for a little while. But Roger said, Oh, let them talk. Then he saw newcomers. Bruce came in with Edith, and George, and young Elizabeth, and Alan came with Deborah, who had a baby in her arms, and Laura stood beside them. Here were his 3 daughters grown, but still, in some uncanny way, they looked to him like children still. And behind them he detected figures long forgotten, of boys and girls whom he had known far back in his own childhood. John, too, had come into the house. Strangely now the walls were gone, had lifted, and a clamorous throng, laughing, shouting, pummeling, hedged him in on every hand. Deborah's big family. Soon the uproar wearied him, and Roger tried to shut them out, to bring back again the walls to his house, and sometimes he succeeded, and he was left for a while in peace with Judith and his 3 small girls. But despite his efforts to keep them there, new faces kept intruding. Swiftly his small family grew, split into other families, and these were merged with other figures pressing in from every side. Again he felt the presence of countless families all around, dividing, reuniting, with ceaseless changes and fresh life, a never-ending multitude. Here they were singing and dancing, and Laura gaily waved to him. At another place were only men, and they were struggling savagely to clutch things from each other's hands. A sea of scowling visages, angry shouts, fists clenched in air, and he thought he saw Bruce for an instant. Behind them lay wide valleys obscured by heavy clouds of smoke, and he could hear the roar of guns. But they vanished suddenly, and he saw women mourning now, and Edith with her children turned to him her anxious eyes. He tried to reach and help her, but already she had gone. And behind her came huge bending forms, men heaving at great burdens, jaws set in scowls of fierce revolt. And John was there on his crutches, and near him was a figure bound into a chair of steel, with terror in the straining limbs, while in desperation Deborah tried to wrench him free. Abruptly, Roger turned away. And in a twinkling, all was gone, the tumult and the clangor, and he was in a silent place high up on a mountainside. It was dusk. A herd of cattle passed, and George came close behind them, and around him Roger saw, emerging from the semi-dark, faces turning like his own to the summits of the mountains and the billowy splendors there. It grew so dark he could see no more. There fell a deep silence, not a sound but the occasional chirp of a bird or the faint whir of an insect. Even the glow on the peaks was gone. Darkness, only darkness. Surely this is death, he thought. After that he was alone, and presently from far away he heard the booming of a bell, deep and slow, sepulchral, as it measured off his life. Another silence followed, and this time it was more profound, and with a breathless awe he knew that all the people who had ever lived on earth were before him in the void to which he himself was drifting, people of all nations, of countless generations, reaching back and back and back to the beginnings of mankind, the mightiest family of all that had stumbled up through the ages, had slaved and starved and dreamed and died, had blindly hated, blindly killed, had raised up gods and idols and yearned for everlasting life, had laughed and played and danced along, had loved and mated, given birth, had endlessly renewed itself and handed on its heritage, had striven hungrily to learn, had groped its way in darkness, and after all its struggles had come now barely to the dawn. And then a voice within him cried, "What is humanity but a child? In the name of the dead I salute the unborn." Slowly a glow appeared in his dream, and once again the scene had changed. The light was coming from long rows of houses, rising tall and steep out of a teeming city street. And from these lighted houses children now came pouring forth. They filled the street from wall to wall with a torrent of warm, vivid hues. They joined in mad, tempestuous games. They shouted and they danced with glee. They whirled each other round and round. The very air seemed quivering. Then was heard the crash of a band, and he saw them marching into school. In and in and in they pressed, till the school seemed fairly bursting. Out they came by another way, and went off marching down the street with the big flag waving at their head. He followed and saw the street divide into narrower streets and byways, into roads and country lanes, and all were filled with children. In endless multitudes they came, marching, marching, spreading, spreading, like wide bobbing fields of flowers, rolling out across the land, toward a great round flashing sun above a distant rim of hills. The sun rose strangely dazzling. It filled the heavens with blinding light. He felt himself drawn up and up, while from somewhere far behind he heard the cry of Deborah's child. A clear, sweet thrill of happiness came, and after that we do not know, for he had left his family. And that was His Family by Ernest Poole, published in 1917 by the Macmillan Company in New York, and the winner of the very first Pulitzer Prize for fiction. Next, I'll be reading the second book to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, which is The Magnificent Ambersons by Booth Tarkington. That one will be coming soon. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I know you'll enjoy the next one. All right, see you guys soon. Bye-bye.